Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to talk about the downtown area. I've sort of defined it maybe in a little different way, but I'll show you a map. I'm not going to cover all of the historic buildings. Certainly there's some that I've missed, but partly in the interest of time, I've confined it to, it might be 19 or so. I can't remember exactly. But anyway, downtown Iowa City contains a mixture of new and old structures, as you know. And they range in build dates in my presentation from 1852 to 2018. There are buildings that, my goodness, I repeated myself in a sentence right here. I'm not editing very well. Anyway, yes, the latest one you're all familiar with is the Chauncey. And the first one we'll get to as I start. But the area that I'm considering the downtown is outlined in red here, and I'm showing the location of the buildings. And I'll take each building from oldest to newest and discuss the events of the day in Iowa City and U.S. history. The oldest building is the Park House Hotel. It really looks like it's a nice shape. It was actually built in 1852. When the population of Iowa City was only 1,250. Can you imagine that? It was operated as a hotel for about 10 years. Between 1852 and 1857, the Park House was used mostly by legislators who came to Iowa City when the state legislature was in session, because Iowa City was the state capital during that period. In 1857, the capital was moved to Des Moines. Harriet Beecher Stowe's expose on slavery in America was published in that year when she was 41 years old. Uncle Tom's Cabin was probably the best-selling novel of the 19th century and the second best-selling book of that century after the Bible. St. Agatha's Seminary operated out of the building from about 1862 to 1909, so quite a run. It had classrooms and boarding rooms and was used to train young ladies. A Mr. Berkeley, who must have been the owner, opened the building as a dormitory for ladies later in 1909. It was called Svendy Hall. And I forgot what the derivation of the Svendy was, something from the old world, I think. In 1917, the building was remodeled and opened as the Berkeley Apartment House. Then in about 1996, because of code violations and structural problems, the building was ordered to be vacated and was under consideration for demolition. Instead, it was renovated and now it contains apartments. Of these two prominent buildings here in the foreground, the left one was built in 1856 as the Franklin Printing House. I don't have information on the one on the right, but it looks very much of the same era. I think only the left portion is the Franklin Printing House. And if you look on the far left, what you're looking at is Plaza Center 1. That was part of the replacement buildings for the urban renewal that went on in the 1970s. Most likely the brick used in this Franklin Printing House came from Sylvanus Johnson's brickyard. The brick business of Nicholas Oakes also opened, though, in 1856, so he may have been the supplier. Johnson made bricks for many of the early Iowa City buildings, including the inner walls of the old Capitol building. The Printing House building later housed the Iowa City Capitol Reporter and the Iowa Standard, which were two prominent Iowa City newspapers. In the 20th century, it housed the Koza and McAllister Grocery. You know the McAllister name from the McAllister Road that goes over the relatively new bridge on the south side of Iowa City below Napoleon Park. This is an interesting photo. Note the large cash register in the foreground. When the printing house was constructed in 1856, John Brown led his infamous raid and massacre at Pottawatomie Creek in Kansas. And in 1859, Brown came through Iowa City with a group of fugitive slaves that he was able to smuggle on a train that took them to their freedom at Windsor, Ontario, Canada. And on January 1st of 1856, the Mississippi and Missouri Railroad reached Iowa City, making the rail line the most western point in the country. Also, the first Iowa City Fairgrounds were established, and it was at present-day Gateway 1's property. Furthermore, the first Presbyterian church, now known as Old Brick, was under construction, and the Union Brewery was established, now part of Brewery Square. The cornerstone for the present St. Mary's Catholic Church was laid on October 27, 1867, just 2 years after the end of our Civil War. However, in 1841, under Father Mazzucchelli's direction, the cornerstone for a previous church was laid on the same property. The church was in use by the spring of 1843, but it was soon found to be too small. This is St. Mary's, seen in about 1869, before the 196-foot spire was added, and that happened in 1872. The structure here that we're using today was built around and over that first church while the parish continued to worship in the old church. And after the new building roofs was complete, the old church was dismantled inside the fully enclosed building and carried out piece by piece through the front doors. St. Mary's Parish was divided when other parishes were established in Iowa City. St. Patrick's was founded in 1872, and its church was built in 1879, but destroyed by the recent tornado. And then in 1891, St. Wenceslas was built to serve the Bohemian community. The first Congregational church downtown on the corner of Clinton and Jefferson, built in 1868 to 69 in the Gothic Revival style. When it was built, the population of Iowa City was just under 6,000. Also in that year of 1869, the first transcontinental railroad was completed, and the Golden Spike was driven at Promontory Point, Utah. Another church, Trinity Episcopal Church, at 320 East College Street, down from the library, built in 1871, but it seems to belie its age when you look at it today. Many of you remember Father Robert Holtzhammer. There it is today, the previous one. I guess there we go. I think it belies its age and the way but apparently that's part of the original structure. Father Holtzhammer was a pastor there from 1962 to 1990, and he was known as the voice of the Hawkeyes, and was the announcer at football and men's basketball games from 1974 to 1999. He died in 2015 at the age of 92. When the church was built, the Great Chicago Fire took place in 1871. But that same night, an even deadlier forest fire wiped out the town of Peshtigo, Wisconsin, which is up there by Green Bay, and other villages and towns north of Green Bay. Being driven by strong winds, it killed up to 2,500 people and is the deadliest fire in American history. The IXL block, if you look way up at the top right in the white structure there where it curves, I'll show you a close-up, it says IXL block, and it dates to 1883. The term block does not denote a section of town bordered by 4 streets, but to a large building with many units in it, or a group of buildings regarded as a unit. Local historian Al Dawson has a presentation that explains the derivation of the IXL block. I don't remember how it came about. I did hear it, but I guess it didn't sink in. Here's a close-up view of that IXL block insignia in 1883 at the top of the building. In 1883, the Brooklyn Bridge opened in New York City. And Buffalo Bill Cody debuted his Wild West show. The IXL block has housed many businesses over the years. The one you may remember is Barbara's Bake Shop, which was in the part on the far right to the east. And the people who started that brought the name over from Des Moines. Now, the First National Bank, I don't have a bill date for it, but it was before 1893. The First National Bank on the northeast corner of Dubuque and Washington is now U.S. Bank. It was remodeled in 1893. And again, it was remodeled and enlarged in 1911. The first Indianapolis 500 race was held in 1911. And here's the 1912 image of the First National Bank. And note the streetcar there on the right. Streetcars started operating in Iowa City in 1910, and they ran till just 1930 or just after. By the 1980s, the buildings on Dubuque Street as far north as the alley were included in the bank. So it's a pretty big structure. And remember, the Senior Center has hosted one or two events, if not more, in the basement. It's quite a large building. Now, University Hospital. University Hospital was built on Iowa Avenue in 1897. This is a view of it looking north from Lynn Street, and the picture was made after 3 additions had been made in 1908, 1912, and 1914. It's a rather symmetrical looking building at that time. It isn't any longer. Here's a nice straight on view of the hospital from a 1920 photograph. When it was built in 1897, William McKinley became president and the Boston subway opened. This was the first subway system in the United States. And in 1910, concerning the hospital, Abraham Flexner, who I believe was a scientist of some sort, not an MD, but a PhD type, he carried out a monumental study of all of the medical schools in the United States. And when he submitted his report to the University of Iowa, he recommended that the program be shut down. It was that bad. He cited poor facilities, the absentee residency of some of the faculty, and perhaps some other reasons. But the university was determined to make things better, and the medical program, of course, survived. Today, only a portion of the hospital building remains. This is the COD laundry, and you can see written on the west side of the building, it's on Iowa Avenue, COD laundry running from top to bottom there. Up until recently, it housed the Blue Moose Tap House, but it's changing into a music venue. I don't have a picture of the new storefront. The COD steam laundry was established in 1899, and a couple years earlier, the second floor was used as the site for the first Iowa City Public Library, while the first floor housed the COD steam laundry. Well, then I guess it might have been a couple of years earlier. I don't have the exact date of when it, well, we'll see. It was around 1897. Also in 1899, a bowling alley was listed at the building. It's been written that by the turn of the 20th century, downtown Iowa Avenue had become Laundry Row, which included the People's Steam Laundry. The laundries employed dozens of young women, including many Bohemians, before and after World War I. The Bohemian people probably lived in Goosetown. In the early 1900s, there were at least 3 laundries along Iowa Avenue, including an authentic Chinese laundry. In the early 1930s, when the post office on Lynn Street, which is now our senior center, was being enlarged, the COD building housed the U.S. Post Office. And also in 1933, a printing facility was here, and later a dental supply office. It's had quite a few different things in it. Do you recognize this building on the northwest corner of Gilbert Street and Washington Street? It began as the Berner Fry building in 1899, built by Prussian immigrant Emil Borner as a factory for the production of vanilla extract, perfumes, and pharmaceuticals. It's very long and narrow, about 20 feet by 200 feet. That same year, two larger factories were built just east of the city limits. There was the O.S. Kelly factory that manufactured farm machinery and implements. You remember it as the Advanced Drainage Systems factory in recent years, before it was torn down. And also in 1899, Willard, Maine began construction on a jewelry factory in East Iowa City. Maine claimed it was the largest jewelry factory west of the Mississippi River. Almost 40 years later, it burned down in a spectacular fire in 1937. In 1922, the Berner Fry building was converted into the 46-room Washington Hotel, which later became the Davis Hotel. And we can still see the Davis writing on the west side of the building above Gabe's. The first public library opened in Iowa City in October of 1904. The enormously wealthy Scottish-American businessman and philanthropist Andrew Carnegie was said to have donated money for over 2,500 libraries throughout the world. He did this between 1883 and 1929. When this library was built, for the year before, the Ford Motor Company was founded. The Wright brothers made their first powered flight in their Wright Flyer. And Iowa City High School, later become Central Junior High, was built. Try to picture where this was. I'm sure you remember this, many of us. Even after I moved in 1979, it was still there. I think it was torn down maybe in 1982. But picture what's there now. Maybe we'll comment on that after we're done. Do any of you recognize this building? It still exists here in Iowa City, but in a little different form. It's a Beaux-Arts style building constructed of Indiana limestone. It was built in 1904, but it received a large addition in 1931. In this photo, the one-story building facing on the Washington Street is being prepared for that expansion in 1931. The building was reoriented to face Lynn Street. A second floor was added, and the structure was extended north to the alley. And in the process, the building was increased in size nearly fivefold. Now, what is the building today? Here it is today. When the post office was built in 1904, the United States acquired the Panama Canal Zone from the Republic of Panama. In Iowa City, the Interurban Railroad was established, and the town of Swisher, Iowa was born along with the new railroad. Our present senior center building remained Iowa City's post office until 1975, when a new facility on South Clinton Street was built. 2 years after the post office left our senior center building, it was purchased by the city, Johnson County Senior Center, and it underwent 4 years of renovation, and it opened in September of 1981 as the senior center. Inside is quite beautiful, with some gorgeous woodwork, and a rather spectacular staircase from the first floor to the second. Here's the door to the structure known as the Paul Helen Building, which was built in 1910. How was the name derived? It was named for the children of the owners, the children being Paul and Helen. The style of the building is known as Chicago School. It's a structure with 5 storefronts. Here we see the entire building. To me, it looks much newer than to the east Englert Theater, which we'll discuss shortly, but it's actually 2 years older than the Englert, just the style of the front. Among the first floor tenants was the Iowa City Gas and Electric Company, with 2 of the first floor storefronts. Smith and Seelig, later Lennox and Seelig, was also on the first floor. Both of those businesses were in the Paul Hillen building for at least 64 years, until at least 1974. The first storefront was that of a saloon and one of the building's owners, William Kurz. Later, this saloon was replaced by the College Inn, a restaurant and ice cream shop, John Wilson's Sporting Goods, and Frowine Office Supply. The second floor has had many tenants, including physicians, dentists, attorneys, insurance agencies, Roland Smith Realtors, architects, a small bookshop, a public stenographer, and a beauty shop. The third floor was built with an extra strong floor to accommodate drilling done by members of the local National Guard unit. The third floor was also used as a dance hall and by a television commercial and recording company. A friend of mine told me that the third floor had 1 or more tennis courts for a time. Another friend related this story. He said there was a duck pin bowling alley on the third floor. Duck pins are small pins, and the bowling ball that is used has no holes in it. I remember doing that out east when we lived there for a year. My friend was hired to set the pins, and during off moments, he recalled that he would buy fudgesicles that were sold there, and he and his buddies would bite the ends off and lean out the windows and try to drop them on the hats of men who were passing below on the sidewalk. I guess boys must play. There are 3 things to note in Iowa City in 1910. The first airplane flight in the state of Iowa took place in Iowa City, and the streetcar began operation in November. And in 1910, a proposal was put before the voters of Iowa City and rural Johnson County to double the size of Iowa City in area. From this area outlined in red to this outline in blue. And the measure passed. So what happened in so doing was it took in the Manville addition and the area known as Chautauqua Heights, just to the west of Manville, and it took in the Rundle addition and East Iowa City, which had been a separate community that was not part of Iowa City. It was a rural subdivision or its own little town. Well, as we said, adjoining the Paul Hillen building to the east is the Englert Theater. It opened in 1912 or 1913. I can't pin that down exactly. I've looked in newspapers even. The building was constructed by Will Englert and his wife Etta Chopek, both of whom were already prominent Iowa City business people. Here is a 1918 view of the original interior. In 1926, a fire destroyed the interior of the theater. I don't think it destroyed everything, though. But Etta Englert, who remarried as Etta Chopek Englert Hanlon, had the theater rebuilt, perhaps more lavishly than before. The Englert Theater screened the first talkie motion picture in Iowa City on June 9th of 1928. It was a first-run film called The Jazz Singer and starred Al Jolson. The Englert staged many notable vaudeville acts and had such performers as Ethel Barrymore, Ed Wynn, and Sarah Bernhardt on its stage. Sometime before 1989, the Englert was altered by its division into 2 auditoriums. I remember seeing Dances with Wolves there. It continued showing movies until 1999, and then it was sold. And then a public campaign was carried on as the Save the Englert project, raising sufficient funds to restore the theater back to its original configuration as a single auditorium. It reopened as a nonprofit theater, and in trying to keep the theater fully utilized, an agreement with the University of Iowa provided for up to 40 nights of usage each year. Currently, the Englert normally has live events about 225 nights each year. That is pre-COVID. That's a lot of usage. Now, sometime around 1912, a group of men decided to build a hotel in downtown Iowa City. They were looking for a suitable location. Then on October 10th of 1912, a devastating fire with an explosion took down the Metropolitan building at the southwest corner of Washington and Dubuque Streets. Here's a view of the fire in progress. The Jefferson Hotel was built at the site in 1913, taking about 8.5 months to build, and was dedicated in November of that year. It was referred to as the finest hotel in Iowa. Each room had hot and cold running water, a telephone, steam heat, and electric lights. There was an electric elevator and a 250-foot artesian well. Some merchants rented space in the building. There was a shoe store, a dress shop, a drug store, a barber shop, and a billiard parlor. This is a view of the hotel lobby taken on opening day. This image showcases the lobby even a little better. In this 1925 view, we see a streetcar traveling on rails. By this time, there were 5 streetcar lines in Iowa City, but it was only going to last about another 5 years because of at least 2 things. Can you think of why it died out when it did? Ownership of the personal automobile was getting more and more widespread. Look at all the cars in the photo. And also notice what they called a go anywhere bus, right here, right here. Why would anyone want to take the streetcar if a bus could take you on many more routes than the streetcar system could? There are 2 more things that I'd like to note in the photo. The officer directing traffic here, no street lights, no stop signs, stoplights. And what about the Jefferson Hotel itself? In 1928, 2 floors were added to the hotel. Here is a view of the hotel after the completion of the extra stories. Many notable people have stayed there, including John F. Kennedy during his 1960 presidential campaign. Here's a present day view. It's now called the Jefferson Building. In 1967, the University of Iowa Facilities Corporation bought the hotel. The 2nd through 8th floors were sold to the UI for office space, with the Facilities Corporation retaining ownership of the basement and 1st floor, which is retail rental space. Hertine and Stocker is the prominent merchant on the 1st floor. This is known as Stuart Hall, S-T-U-I-T. It's named for Dewey Stuart, who was a former dean of the College of Liberal Arts. It's a university building. Built in 1916 as the Isolation Hospital. It's located on the southwest corner of Jefferson and Gilbert Streets. This is how it appeared in 1918 when a porch section was added to the south side. In that year of 1916, Jeanette Rankin of Montana became the first woman elected to the United States Congress, winning a seat in the House of Representatives. Frank Hohenschuh began his businesses in the mid-1800s, operating both a funeral home and a furniture business on Dubuque Street in downtown Iowa City. It was common for mortuary owners to have furniture businesses too. I think you can kind of see how they go hand in hand. Frank died in 1876, and his son William P. Hohenschuh took over the business. In 1891, he organized the Iowa Funeral Directors Association, serving as its president, and he was also elected president of the National Funeral Directors Association in 1894. He also established the Hohenschuh Carpenter College of Embalming in Des Moines, served on the faculty of the Embalming College at the University of Minnesota, and organized the Western College of Embalming in Chicago in 1895. Very prominent man in his field. In 1917, Hohenschuh designed and constructed the funeral parlor building at 13 South Lynn Street, just across the street and north from the Senior Center. In 1917, the United States declared war on Germany and entered World War I. Also in 1917, 4 new elementary schools were built in Iowa City to replace the old ward schools, W-A-R-D. We had wards. We had 5 wards in Iowa City, but the 5th ward went to the 4th ward school. The Kellogg Elementary would not be familiar to most of you. However, you all remember Horace Mann, still there in Longfellow, and sadly Sabin, which was taken down a few years ago. Kellogg Elementary sat at the site of the VA hospital, and when it was demolished, the Lincoln School replaced it up in Manville Heights, yes. Well, Hohenschuh died in 1920, after which John Donahue purchased the business. John's son Walter Donahue later ran the funeral home as Donahue Mortuary until his death in 1974. And then 4 years later, Michael and Vicki Lensing bought the Donahue Mortuary and operated the funeral home here until June of 1984, when they moved to the new building on Kirkwood Avenue. Currently, the Iowa City Yacht Club occupies the building. And this is the Art Deco Iowa City Press Citizen building that was built in 1937. Before that, there was a railroad or a streetcar barn that was located there. The Iowa City Press Citizen was created in 1920 by the merger of the Democratic Iowa City Press, founded in 1860, and the Republican Iowa City Citizen, founded in 1891. And here's a view of the building shortly after it was built. The year it was built, the Golden Gate Bridge was built, and the Hindenburg dirigible disaster occurred. And as I had mentioned, in 1937, that disastrous fire that consumed the main jewelry factory, which by that time had turned into a seed corn storage facility. And that, by the way, sat on Chaddock Green at the end of 4th Avenue where it meets Friendship Street. Also, at this time in Iowa City, Howard Moffett was busy building his eclectic houses. Natural gas was introduced in Iowa City, replacing the coal gas that was being manufactured. And the Rock Island Rocket ran its first passenger train. On January 21st, 1991, the Press Citizen moved its operations out of the building to a new building at 1725 North Dodge Street, but returned to downtown Iowa City in March of 2011 on Lynn Street. This building, I'm not sure if it's condominiums or apartments, but it's housing units. If someone knows, please chime in at the end. Finally, we come to the last building on our tour. It's the State Historical Society of Iowa Centennial Building, which was erected in 1958. And this year, rock and roll was all the rage, and Owens Brush, which was later to become Oral-B, and now the Procter & Gamble Oral Care site, was established on Lower Muscatine Road. Just 3 years before that, in 1955, Procter & Gamble began building a major manufacturing facility, in large part to produce the newly developed toothpaste Crest. Crest was a revolutionary fluoride-containing toothpaste that became a huge success. The Historical Society building houses original newspapers, newspapers on microfilm, books, historical photographs, and many other materials used by researchers and other interested parties. It also has a full basement and a sub-basement. I'll leave you with this interesting aerial view of downtown Iowa City in 1975. We can study that for a bit. We were in the midst of a major urban renewal project, or as my friend Rich Green terms it, urban removal. At the time, it was quite controversial. Many of you who have been here for 41 years, as I have or longer, have seen so much change and growth in town. Yet we have managed to retain many of our downtown historic buildings. A lot of empty spaces here that were subsequently built upon. Here's the Jefferson Hotel. I think that's it. And so just north or south of that would be that building I showed you, the Franklin Printing House. And then Plaza Center 1 would be where my arrow, if you can see it, is surrounding right here. And what about the old Capitol Mall? That would be right here, wouldn't it? In this big parking area here. And then south of that, we have all built up. I was going to put up my contact information for you here, but if any of you would like that, I can fetch that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I just have a comment to make. The Citizen Building that's on Washington Street across from the Senior Center is an apartment complex for people 55 and over.
Oh, okay. Good to know that. So it's not, they're not purchased units then, they're rental.
They're 8 one-bedroom apartments.
Okay.
Rental.
Michelle was mentioning to me earlier that the Englert's marquee has been taken down. And she thought the wood structure behind it looked like it might have needed some work. So perhaps hopefully they're going to put it back up. It's quite historic.
They are. They have a big renovation program going on right now, and that's part of it.
Oh, good. Are they doing anything inside as well, Monica?
That part I don't know. I just had gotten an email about the marquee.